I'm realizing that we are really the one thing that we cannot escape. But I'm also recognizing that if we learn to love what's here, then, we'll sort of enjoy every space we occupy. In a lot of ways, everywhere you go, there you are. And I think we need to sort of give ourselves an opportunity to learn to love what is currently here. And I think it's about really not living in reference to a lot of things. Recently, I'm recognizing that a lot of our power is taken away in our insistence of things to be a certain way. I think we don't recognize how much of the world is really just a reflection of who we are. And I think in giving ourselves the opportunity to see that reflection, we'll recognize that it's really about what we show it that we see. And what we show ourselves that we truly express. Like if we constantly show ourselves, either through our actions, our feelings, our thoughts about ourselves, that we're inadequate, that we can't do something, that we're unable, that we're going to feel unable regardless of whatever thoughts may occupy the moment. And that's why I think we need to recognize how addicted we are to certain feelings and thoughts. That's why I think you can maybe get into an anxious or uncomfortable situation and maybe have a thought like, come on, I know I'm better than this, I can achieve this, I can do this. And maybe it doesn't change as much as you want it to. And I think the reason it doesn't change as much as we want it to is because we've impressed so heavily on ourselves that things are a certain way. And I think part of us truly doesn't believe it because it's like we're trying to coerce ourselves. I think a lot of us try to change ourselves in an act of coercion rather than an act of being. We try to convince ourselves that we're patient, like, oh, I'm better than this, I'm good, I'm da da da. And we don't actually give ourselves the chance to be present and interject and choose to be that way specifically. Instead, we sort of throw it out there and in the hopes that it manifests into something that we are. And I think that's sort of a counteractive point of change. I think we need to be the ones to enforce our change. We need to be the ones to actually change. And I think it's always us who changes whether or not we're consciously aware of it. And that's why I think many people are more so changed by circumstance than their own mental conditioning. Because circumstance will ingrain into you and make you believe it's real. And I think we just have to learn how to make ourselves believe certain stuff is real for ourselves. And when I say circumstances make you believe something is real, it's always in proportion to who you are. Sometimes we fail at certain things and we convince ourselves we're a failure because of those things, because we fail. But that doesn't really mean that we're a failure. That doesn't really mean that we can't achieve. It just means that we've believed it due to this certain event and circumstance. And I think we owe it to ourselves in a lot of ways to bridge the gap, to sort of bridge the gap in line between our own ego and identification with ourselves. And learn how to identify ourselves in a way that actually allows us to be present in the moment and attract certain things into our life. I'm realizing a lot of attraction is subconscious. It's what we inherently believe, sly remarks we may make to ourselves, and also the alignment we make with our actual physical selves, like doing things that actually represent the care we have for ourselves, our self-care, our love for ourselves, our expression to ourselves. And there are many things I think I've started to do and think that are important. Like I began to meditate a lot more, to journal, to write, and to exercise, to take care of my skin, to take care of things that actually I wouldn't say are the most important things in a sense of being perceived, but recognizing that how you think you're perceived is always in reference to how you perceive yourself, which is why I'm grateful that Teach Hanley is sponsoring today's video. If you guys are unfamiliar with Teach Hanley, they're an uncomplicated skincare brand for men, and they've sent me over a couple items I'll showcase today, and I have been using their products for about, it feels like a year now. But their level 1 system includes a wash, a scrub, and then an AM and PM moisturizer. I think that skincare is one of those important things because I think it really just is about how you look at yourself. And I think if we have telltale signs that society tells us to sort of hark on ourselves about, such as our skin, then it's much harder to sort of establish some type of love for what we see. And I'm not saying that to say that we have to have completely flawless skin to love ourselves, but to say that when we're actually working towards our own betterment, then we'll stop seeing the ways in which we're inadequate and start seeing the ways in which we're actually moving towards our own change. And because they're sponsoring this video, they're offering you guys an amazing deal. You can sign up and save 40% off your first box today and get a gift valued at $20, which would be an exfoliating brush or a manicure set. I would personally recommend the exfoliating brush. I've been using it for quite a while. And you can sign up with the link to be a member for life and get 20% off of that. I think that in our journey with who we are and our journey with ourselves, it's really just about the opportunities you give yourself to be in the moment, to give yourself thought. Like, I don't know what happened, but yesterday and this morning, I've had a somewhat different outlook on how it really works. And I feel like in a lot of ways, I was waiting for signs, waiting for omens, waiting for things to sort of align with me without aligning myself to them in both thought and how I conduct myself. And I think thought is one of those important things that contributes to it as well, because we don't often recognize how much our subtle thoughts and antics actually contribute to our worldview and in view of ourselves. Like, even if we have some type of thing where we're holding on to in terms of our intention, like anyone who understands like how manifestation works or anything like that works, it's really just fixing your mind on a certain thing and feeling the emotion ahead of the time. And I think sometimes we get so focal pointed on that singular thing, we don't recognize the things that take away from it. And sometimes it's the conditioning we give ourselves. And the reason I made the video, "You have to let yourself go, I'm coming to remember," was really just to say that we have to get out of our own way when it comes to stuff like that. I think our thoughts are the main contributor to it, because even when we think about the things that we want and we want to feel that way, we might have a subtle thought whenever we're putting something out there that may be like, "Oh, this isn't going to do well." Or we might have another thought when we're applying ourselves, or maybe we have to do some presentation or something like, "Oh, you're going to mess up. What if you mess up?" And it's those subtle whispers that sort of take us away from ourselves. And what I'm recognizing is you don't get rid of those whispers, or at least they don't get rid of themselves. You have to interject something in kind to them. And at first I used to talk about you can't really fight the mind with the mind. And I think that much is true, but it's about recognizing that it's not even a fight. There's one mind, and it's you recognizing what has been placed there before and what you want in its place. And sometimes it's about bringing yourself to the present to interject that thing. Like, whenever I think stuff that's limiting now, I'm making the intention to literally think the opposite. Because everything really exists on a scale. It's like the law of polarity, I think. Like, good and bad are all one scale. It's really the same attribute, just being slid back and forth. Same thing with like hot and cold. It's really the same attribute, temperature, being slid up and down. And if we don't recognize most of our feelings, like anxiety and excitement, same thing, different expressions. And if we don't give ourselves a chance to express something in a positive way, then oftentimes we contribute to a negative means. I think a lot of us have faith in negative outcome because it's easy, because we see it in the world, because we see it within ourselves, because we know that failure is possible. We know that if we do nothing, we'll fail. We know that if we don't try, if we contribute very little, then there's a good chance of failure. And I think we get that so ingrained in ourselves that we don't even apply ourselves to what we do many times. And I think it's about actually applying ourselves and doing what we can. Believing in the positive rather than the negative. And what that means to me is genuinely positing to yourself that something is possible for you. Genuinely giving yourself an opportunity to be where you are, void of some type of abstraction and negativity. And when I say abstraction and negativity, I mean thinking that things are going to get worse than what they are. And I don't mean that to say that that's constantly going to change it, but to say that when we live in reference to circumstance alone, then circumstance compounds upon itself. If we take for a second to believe the idea that our thoughts become real, or that the world is a reflection of who we are. Say we were positive at one point, then we started attaching ourselves to some negative idea. Then we experience something negative to confirm that. Then we think more negative. Then we experience more negative to confirm that. And it just keeps going, and it's a constant loop. It's a negative feedback loop. or positive, I don't know, whatever. It's a feedback loop. It just keeps compounding on itself. And I think until we break that cycle, we won't really recognize that it's there. And I think the only way to break a cycle is to be outside of it. And what that means to me isn't necessarily to say that you have to just forget about all the negativity. But you have to just recognize, at the very least, it just matters how you feel now. It doesn't really matter how you felt in the past. It's not really about rewriting the past, but taking a role in actually writing the future by being present enough to recognize that the future doesn't start tomorrow, it starts today. It starts right now. With each passing second, we're etching into the quote unquote future. And that's why I feel like it's important to not even reference ourselves to such a scale of time. I feel like that limits us in a way because we think that we're supposed to be at a certain place at a certain time, or we think that certain things are supposed to be happening where we aren't. But there's no objective, there's no point in constantly abstracting ourselves from what is. We sort of have to give ourselves to the moment to be able to do something with it. And I think once we do something with it, like interject positivity, love for ourselves, appreciation, then we'll recognize that we were never really lacking in terms of the feeling, never really lacking in our capability to feel fulfilled in where we are. We're just lacking in our ability to see the things that can prescribe us that feeling. And we have such a set notion on how things are supposed to look in order to give us happiness, in order to give us peace. But peace is not a place, it's a mentality. Abundance is not in what you have, but appreciating not in what you don't have, but in what you do have. It's in recognizing and appreciating what currently is within your possession, including yourself. I think the objective isn't to have things to love, but to love yourself as you would a possession. Not to be super possessive of yourself in a way, but recognize the ways in which you need to take care of yourself mentally, physically, etc., etc. And that doesn't always mean you have to jump through hoops to do that. And that doesn't mean that your love is conditioned by you doing stuff like that, but to say that it is enforced. It's sort of an expression of your own love to be disciplined in what you do, an expression of your own love to sort of carry yourself with yourself every moment and recognize that you're there. Recognize that there is somebody doing the action that you're sort of enacting. And I don't mean that to say you have to be overzealously focused on yourself and worried about your perception, worried about how you do this, that, and the other. But recognize that how you do this, that, and the other is always in proportion to how you feel about yourself innermost and deeply. That's why I feel like it's always important to sort of recognize that you can't really escape from yourself in both a good and bad way. I'm sort of learning to be happy with who I genuinely am and carrying that with me. Like, even right now, I feel a subtle happiness just in being able to express myself the way I am, and I think giving myself that freedom is what has allowed me to do a lot of things in my life, because it stops being about, the perception. It stops being about how I think it's going to be intercepted and me prescribing my own thing onto it, me being grateful for it so I don't have to derive gratitude for anything else. Learning to vest our positivity through the actions that we're doing to get something rather than just the objective. Because if we only chase the outcome and objective, then once we get it, we don't really feel fulfilled in doing anything else. We'll find other things to sort of chase and intend to. And I think we shouldn't really limit ourselves to a search when it comes to our appreciation. I think when we limit ourselves to a search when it comes to our appreciation, we lose a lot of our ability to do anything, because it becomes about searching. It becomes about finding things that aren't already in your possession. And through that, instantiating that things aren't currently in your possession. Like, we search for happiness and all of a sudden we don't have it. And we search for love and all of a sudden we don't have it for ourselves. It's the way we abstract and take away from ourselves in reference to the things we quote unquote don't have that really takes us away. And that's why I think we need to recognize that we're already here. And we're already enough for ourselves. As long as you have yourself, you have someone. That's not to say you can't have other people, not to say you can't appreciate other people. I love a lot of the people I've been able to interact with, and I'm recognizing that even more now that I'm actually able to recognize that I'm here too. Because once you acknowledge yourself as someone that's worth appreciation, then you recognize that people appreciating you is really people appreciating you. Not appreciating some fictitious character you're running around with, not appreciating something that they're maybe not seeing. We all have internal worlds, everyone does. You appreciate someone for who they are, for who they express themselves as, for whatever they embody, regardless. Like, I'm recognizing that too with my friends that I've known from a very young age, even when they change. It doesn't really matter. People's embodiment and who they are truly is always going to shine through in a subtle way. And I think it's when we show so much resistance to that we actually find ourselves at odds with a lot of things. Because it stops being about who you are. It starts being about who you think will get a certain reaction. And I think in that way, we're performing. And I think as soon as we give ourselves a real audience, we no longer need to perform. And that means giving ourselves attention enough to be where we are, rather than constantly abstracting ourselves from places that we aren't.